Good morning and live from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. This is Dr. John Stamey, and I want to welcome everyone to ScaryCast. Today we have got one of my favorite guests. We've had him on, I think, 3 or 4 or 5 times, and every time he is engaging and interesting. And that's what about all you can hope for on ScaryCast is get people that engage with you and have an interesting point of view. We have people that have been up in UFOs. We have people that know Bigfoot on a personal level, who have hung out with ghosts a little bit more than they do for Ghost Adventures. When, as a comedian said, well, you got 3 fat guys that walk into a building and they go, ah, and they've never seen a ghost. I love it. That's Mateo Lane. He's one of the funniest comedians out there. And no disrespect to Zach Beggins, because he's done a fine job and has a wonderful enterprise with Ghost Adventures. But anyway, yeah, we got a lot of differing viewpoints and everything. So today, from the West Coast, one of ScaryCast's favorite guests, the one and only flat earth advocate, Mark Sargent. Good afternoon, Mark. How are you doing?
I am doing well, and good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me. It is a pleasure.
Oh, you're welcome. I wanted to do this show with just you and me on it because everybody, whenever we have like a group of ScaryCasters, our regular crew, they always seem to get bottled up with the idea of the flat earth. I mean, I think it's a good idea. I think it has some merit. So as I told you when we were in the green room, and I don't mind telling everybody, I woke up this morning with 2 burning questions that I wanted to ask you. And here is the first one. Are you ready, Mark?
Yep.
Okay. First of all, why would a flat earth believer have a problem with the notion of a spherical earth?
Because the spherical earth, in our opinion, does not make sense. And since all flat earth believers start off as spherical believers, as we all do, I mean, that's what we're raised with, we try to shoot down the flat earth. The t-shirt literally reads, I became a flat earther because I tried to disprove it. For me, it was I love the globe icon. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I was practically married to it. You know, I actually collected antique globes. Nobody was more enchanted with the whole idea of space and the globe than I was. And so when I started looking at it again from a flat Earth perspective, saying, okay, what if there is something wrong with the globe? That's when everything started to fall apart, because I was leaning more and more on our space programs. I was leaning more and more on the scientists. And by the end of the 9 months that it took me to come around to this, I was like, yeah, I can't prove it. I can't prove the globe anymore. There are way more plot holes in the globe model than the flat Earth. There's my opening statement.
All right, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, this is extremely related to that question and the flat earth.
Right.
I'm going to ask a rhetorical question and give my answer.
Okay.
My rhetorical question is, why didn't we go to the moon? Now, when I say that, people look at me because I'm a PhD research scientist from North Carolina State University, and they know that I am well grounded in the scientific method and inquiring about things in a pretty logical way.
Mm-hmm.
But my question is this. I know that you are familiar with the Van Allen radiation belt.
Yes.
Now, from my understanding, those little flimsy suits that the astronauts had in that space capsule, how on earth did the astronauts not get burnt up in the Van Allen radiation belt? That's just a question, and I need an answer as to why they didn't get burnt up.
Right. And there is no answer to that. The radiation, for all intents and purposes, is stopped by only three things on the ground, and most people know what it is. There's lead, which you wear at the dentist's office, that heavy lead thing. There's gold, which is twice as dense as lead, but nobody uses it because it's so incredibly expensive. And there's a whole bunch of water. You could use water, which they use at power plants to do that. Well, all those things, the whole point is that they are dense and they are very, very heavy, which, if you know anything about aerodynamics and flight and space programs, that's the last thing you want to add to any aircraft or spacecraft, is a lot of weight. And so they didn't. And deliberately, it's like, okay, so instead of putting lead shielding or gold shielding or water shielding, which is ridiculous, on the spacecraft, we used aluminum and plastic, which which are very lightweight. They've got some structure to them, but they don't stop radiation at all.
I mean, let's stop.
Yeah.
Plastic can barely contain a can of coffee.
Right. Yeah. Plastic
Back at you. I'm sorry, that jumped in my head and I had to say it.
It's okay. Plastic has its uses, but it's not going to save you from anything, right? Cars are still made out of steel, at their main frame. So yeah, how did the astronauts, notably the Americans, because they're the only ones that even attempted it, which is a whole nother thing, which is, the Americans went multiple times through the radiation belts. Nobody died. Nobody got radiation poisoning. Nobody even got cancer. I think there's still 5 of them, maybe 4 right now, that are still alive, walking around today. The last mission was in 1972. And then no one else out of all the other space agencies, Japan, Europe, China, Russia, and India, no one else even tried. Didn't even attempt, including us, which just blows my freaking mind. So yeah, how'd that happen? Nobody wants to explain. They dodge that question as much as humanly possible. So yeah,
right. I mean, and there's another question. There's another question that I would like to just refresh people about. This is the conversation that I had with my father when they made it to the moon, so to speak.
Right.
And I was a pretty precocious, however old I was, 10, 12, 14 years old, 8, I don't remember. And my dad was an aviation engineer in World War II and a plane mechanic. Nobody went to college back then. They all went directly from high school to the war. And I said, Dad, we all know, and back in those days, we all knew that the moon was 250,000 miles plus or minus away from Earth.
Right.
We all were taught that. That's what we learned in school.
Right.
And I was really interested in radio. I wanted to work at the local radio station. When I became 14, they said they would let me work there. And of course they did. And it was wonderful. And I have my general class ham operator's license. I love radio. And that underscored my question. Why was there no delay when Mission Control in Houston was talking to the astronauts on the moon? That was 250,000 miles away.
Right.
That should have been 8 to 10 seconds delay. Now it just should have.
Yes, absolutely should have. And moreover, how did they have communications at all? Forget about the 8-second delay. 8-second delay assumes you have the power to beam the transmissions that you want back and forth without any distortion whatsoever or cutouts. The transmitter, and you can look at the Apollo pictures all day long. There's a wonderful, beautiful VHF transmitter that is an unclassified VHF transmitter, which is basically running off a car battery, right? That thing's got a range of maybe 50 miles on a good day, right? And that's Morse code. And yet this same transmitter is firing off 10 frames of color video a second and perfect two-way communication. And they lined it up perfectly with a blue ball off in the distance. Your best rifle scope guys couldn't line that thing up. And it was flawless. Absolutely freaking flawless, to the point it's like, oh yeah, let's do a conversation with President Nixon by the way, to your point, without any delay whatsoever, because it would have made the conversation way too awkward. There is a wonderful quote from Mark Twain. which he said, again, this is production 101, which is never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Having the president of the United States have to wait 8 seconds between back and forth conversations is not good television. We've got to make this smoother. And again, the general public is not taught physics. They are not taught engineering, and they don't know, and they go with the Hollywood rules. And that is Hollywood, as you know, you watch movies and television shows your whole life. They gloss over these plot points, right? It's like, well, we're just moving on to the next thing. The audience will accept it. And that's what the government and the space programs were hoping to do. It's like, oh yeah, the people will accept the radio transmissions. They will accept the radiation problem. They will accept the fact that the spacesuit doesn't turn into a parade float and explode and everybody dies, right? How does a soft spacesuit? That's one of the videos I'm working on today. It's like every other object. Sorry, let me throw this out there really quick. I want to, because this is one of my driving force home. Any trolls that are listening to this, I put this challenge out there for years, which is any other soft object in a vacuum chamber expands and then it explodes. A basketball, a football, a can of soda. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's a pressure thing, right? No one can tell me, it's like, what magical thing in that spacesuit keeps it from expanding to where they can't move and then it explodes. They tip over and then they die. No one will touch it. Tell me what magical thing. And even if you can tell me it's a microprocessor thing where they lowered the pressure to a certain point, it's like, okay, in 2024, I may even give you the benefit of the doubt, but in 1969, it was all analog. How'd you do it? Sorry. And one more thing along those lines. Things that are glossed over. Trolls, which is, do you know any scuba diver friends, Dr. John?
Yeah, I do have a few friends. I don't know. I haven't discussed much about it, but I do have some friends, and I know I'm familiar with it a little bit.
The whole premise, which is, you can put the tanks on your back, you go underwater, and all these scuba divers care about is how much air they got left. They are checking that gauge constantly. It's this giant gauge on their wrist, or it's hanging right next to them, and they're looking at how many minutes. Oh, 8 minutes air left. I got to get back up there. You know who didn't care about air ever? The astronauts. They never talked about it. They had apparently an unlimited air supply that never was a thing. It's like, that would be a big deal. It's like, before, I'm sorry, they took risks that no one would ever do. It's like, let's say again, they built a moon buggy, right? Took it off the side of the capsule, built it, even though they didn't show anybody building it, right? Drove this thing out miles away from the craft, right? I'm sorry, if that thing broke down, you have to hoof it back to your craft. It's like, you would never do that because you should have a limited amount of air. I never heard an astronaut say, oh, hey, you got like 12 minutes of air left. We should probably start heading back. Never talked about it. Sorry. I'm passionate about this whole thing.
Well, I mean, that's a good point.
Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
It really is. And I mean, those are several good points, and our listeners will hear them and they can say what they wish.
Yeah. Email me, please.
I'm just here to get, some good, solid opinions as to what's going on.
Yeah.
All right. I think we've covered that question enough that will give people something to think about.
Okay.
Now, here comes the next question.
Yes.
Why would a spherical Earth believer have a problem with the flat Earth model? Why would they have a problem with it?
The spherical Earth believer, or the round earthers, depending on how you want to. I mean, some people go with round, and it's fine. But the spherical Earth or the globe Earth believer has a problem with the flat Earth because it undermines the entire foundation of science. Everything in science, no matter what field you're in, hydrology, biology, geology, archaeology, whatever it is, everything comes back to the main premise that you're living on a globe. If the world is not a globe, if you're living in a building with walls and a floor and a ceiling, then it was built by somebody. And not only that, every other aspect of the globe just gets wiped out, and you have to start rebuilding your models from the ground up. No play on words there. That offends scientists. just offends them. It's scientists, as in fact, I've done 2 videos, short videos, very recently. They're only 60 seconds long, on scientism. How science is the most closed-minded group there is. They don't believe in anything. They believe they'll believe in stuff, and they'll take the money and make all sorts of horrible decisions, but they won't even believe in simple things like animals that we see. Drives me insane. I talked about, briefly about, like, the giant panda was a myth, and the giant anaconda and the giant squid, all myths. And what got to me the most was, and you know what a platypus is, or at least you've heard the name, right? The platypus, right? Talk to any scientist about the platypus, and they'll start looking at their shoes and start trying to think of other things to talk about, because the platypus, they, even when they had a live one staring at them in a lab, right, looking up at them with their beady little eyes, right, moving around, they thought it was fake, because it destroyed their model of evolution. It absolutely tore it to shreds. And which is why we've been coming up with a slogan for it. We're going to call it the Flatipus, I think. And the slogan is impossible but true. And that's what scientists were saying. Like, look, this thing can't exist, and yet there it is. And they had such a hard time with it. The flat Earth, the same thing, which is, if the flat Earth is impossible, but it's true. And they have a really, really tough time with it, and they have to reevaluate everything they studied over the years. And the more education, the worse it is, which is why I say, look, if you have a master's degree or higher in a physical science, God help you if you're a PhD, unless you're as open-minded as you, Dr. John, then, then you're going to have
look,
problems.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Well, no, I mean, come on. In your peer groups, in your circles, I'm sure you know a number of masters and PhD people, which are rock solid about a lot of things, and the whole 5 levels of acceptance really apply to them. They don't want to deal flat Earth. They just laugh it off. It's like, there is no way in a million years. That's in fact, I tell them, I go, well, you better come up with an argument that's easier than ours to explain. And it's like, we don't have to. That's beneath us. Like, oh, fine, you were warned. Anyway, there you go. So that's short version to your question. It offends them. Flat Earth offends them to their very core, and they get angry. I have watched the first 2 stages of acceptance. First one is denial, followed very, very quickly by anger. And that's what they in fact, a lot of them can't get past the anger. They don't even move on to bargaining and depression and all that. It's very, very tough for them to do, because it's their life's work. So there you go.
It is. I'm sorry. I was all of a sudden trying to find some documents that I have about skeptics, because I think skeptics are pretty much mentally ill.
Well,
I am putting together. No. I'm going to tell you why. Now, I just made a big bad statement. If you want to be a skeptic, you need to prove what you're saying. And all they want to do is say, well, it could. You know what? Right now, I am finishing the book, Georgia UFO Sightings.
Right.
30 major sightings in the state of Georgia. People love this stuff.
Yeah.
And I've been promising that people didn't know. I've been hunkering down at night working on all this stuff. So anyway, we're getting pretty close. And hopefully within about a week, it'll be up on Amazon. And I'll send everybody an email, say, buy it. It's going to be a good book.
Yeah.
And what I don't understand, I don't think there are enough weather balloons to have caused all of these UFO sightings.
Oh,
I don't think there are. And I mean, I love the idea of weather balloons. They're preposterous. I mean, they're real, but they don't explain everything.
Right.
They just don't.
Oh, you're old enough to know the cliche jokes. They're almost memes now. In fact, I'm sure they are memes, where when the government tried to look into it decades ago, they kept using the same things. Weather balloon. It's a weather balloon. A Venus. The Venus is bouncing off a weather balloon through some swamp gas. The fact that they even use swamp gas is one of their go-tos, and it's like, oh, no. 90% of them are absolutely misidentified, and the remaining 10%, well, it's like, well, we're not even really going to talk about those. No, I'm right there with you.
Well,
Absolutely.
it's so funny you mentioned swamp gas.
Yeah.
I have lived in Myrtle Beach for 25 years,
Yeah.
coming on 25 years.
Yeah.
We live in a county that is full of swamps,
Sure.
full of swamps. Everywhere you go, there's a bridge that says, you know, Boggy Creek Swamp, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And I have never seen swamp gas. I truly have never.
Right.
And I've been driving the roads around here, all these little 2-lane roads. I sold life insurance 12 years. I have never seen swamp gas.
Yeah.
Now, come on. I'm all the time looking at things. Every time I hear a noise in my condo, I look around to see what could have caused that noise. And a lot of times I see nothing.
Right.
And I know that something or someone is visiting.
Sure.
Now, I just know that for a fact. The more you listen and the more you watch for things, for anomalies, the more you will see them, Mark Sargent. Don't you agree?
Yes. Oh yeah.
And it's like, I'm from Burke County, North Carolina.
Mhm.
What people don't want to give it credit for is that's where the Brown Mountains are and the Brown Mountain Lights. Everybody wants to say it's swamp gas.
Right.
Now, we're 4,000 feet up from sea level.
Sure.
There is no swamp gas in the Brown Mountains. Now, there just is not.
Right.
It's just like you can't get through the Van Allen radiation belt with a little bit of aluminum
Right.
protecting you, and there is no swamp gas in the Brown Mountains.
Right.
But that's what they want. They want to go forth and conquer and tell. And
Yeah.
it's so funny. I had Matt Delph on last night because we're doing a big series on UFOs. I love UFOs. We've got the World UFO Conference coming up November 2nd
Sure.
at Piedmont University in Demarest, Georgia.
Mhm.
And then we have the Atlanta UFO Conference on February the 1st at the Gainesville Civic Center, starring Dr. Brooks Agnew and starring Michael Barra from Ancient Aliens. I mean, we
Nice.
got great people coming in, and I'll just be honest with you. I got to get you over here before life is over. I got to get Mark Sargent over here because I find you entertaining
Well, thank you.
and not an inner. I find you I find you fairly intellectual about what you say. It's
Right.
you have very simple arguments, and I like that. It's just so anyway. We got all this going on, and I had Matt Delph on last night,
Mhm.
and he talked about a Mr. Lale who had interactions with space aliens,
Mhm.
and they let him see some things in a cave in the Brown Mountains
Mhm.
that they shouldn't have, but they did, and he kept his mouth shut. He kept his word. Well, let me tell you about Mr. Lale.
Mhm.
Mr. Lale's mother was my grandmother's best friend in Glen Alpin, North Carolina.
Hmm.
And everybody knew him to be kind of crazy because he had lots of weird stories.
Sure.
And I didn't know what the stories were. My parents, we didn't know. They just crazy stories, whatever. And Miss Lale was all the time trying to cover up for him and make him seem like he wasn't crazy.
Mhm.
He might not have been crazy. His stories are too well put together for a guy that owned a furniture store in Hickory, North Carolina.
Right.
So I mean, the fact is, people want to deny lots of stories. Boy, you can't get a scientist to come near Kelly, Kentucky, and the Kelly Little Green Men.
Yeah.
You can't get a scientist to come within 1,000 miles of that
Sure.
because they don't want to. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to lose their NSF grants. That's all they care about is NSF grants because the National Science Foundation controls what we research because they give out money to do this research.
It's true. When people reach a certain intellectual level, you don't understand. I mean, you do from your education, which is it's all about being published. It's all about peer groups, and it's all about the money, the grants. which was nobody wants to upset any of those apple carts. You definitely, I mean, one of the scariest words I've ever found in the intellectual world is ostracized, which is you make it up to a certain level, you got your peer group, you got your friends. It's like, hey, I'm going to be hanging out with these nerds for the rest of my life, basically. And then all of a sudden, you decide to have a weekend of open-mindedness and say something, tell a story that you shouldn't be telling. And again, the person you were talking about, where no, I don't think he was crazy at all. You know, he was just open-minded enough to explore the possibilities, whereas science just shuts it down. They just drop the steel door, and it's like, nope, we're not talking about it. We're closed. And yeah, it's unfortunate, but then again, you know, I've met some amazing people in the last 10 years of doing this, which you know, and I wouldn't trade them in for anything. I wouldn't trade them in for all the PhDs in the world. No offense to you, of course.
Well, I know. And when I was getting my doctorate at North Carolina State, I was a research associate at the Ryan Institute of Parapsychology in Durham. Now, you talk about something that scares the scientific community.
Sure.
They're terrified of those results.
I bet.
And I have seen things happen there that you can't explain. And they're some of the nicest people fighting an uphill battle with no grants. I don't even know. I think they just barely make their rent every month.
But they're still passionate enough to push forward, though, which I respect.
They are, and I found my little niche. I put on conferences,
Nice.
And so I can go around and talk about UFOs and Bigfoot all I want, and nobody complains, because that's kind of what I do for a living. But it's fun.
Sure.
And I think people need to have an open mind. They're not going to. I mean, I hate to tell you this, but it's like, no, I better not say it. No, there's a statement I was going to say, Mark.
Well, no, I can,
and that one might get me in too much trouble with my contemporaries here. But you know, so I'm, you know,
that's all right. Let me jump in without you having to say it.
Jump in.
Yeah, scientists. I'm going to generalize. Scientists, because of their conditioning, because of their education, because of their background and the reinforcement over and over and over. You're right, and I have said this, especially over the last few years. I'm not worried about trying to. In fact, I'm pretty much. I've never seen a scientist change their mind from a hard line no to to being thumbs up with us. I'm not worried about them for the most part. For me, it's the audience that's listening. It's so when I get on with a host and I know they've got a subject matter expert, they've got a scientist, they got an astronaut, whoever it is, it's like I am not going to convince the astronaut. I don't care about that astronaut. I don't care about the host. I don't care about a lot of them. All I care about is the audience, because the audience is way more flexible, way more pliable. And it's like, yeah, of course, being the audience, most of them are going to go with the host, or most of them are going to go with the subject matter, but there's going to be some that aren't. And I get the emails every time after that, and it's like, hey, tell me more. Hey, tell me more. And they'll go out and do their, which is why we always say, do your own research. Take what I say with a grain of salt. Eventually, it's going to come down to you. I'm not here to convince you or persuade you. I'm here to put the idea in your head. You're the one that's got to figure it out for yourself, which is why we have such a high retention rate. Anyway, sorry, I ramble.
No, that's great. I think that is a very well put statement.
Thanks.
So we do have a problem, and the problem is, and I guess I can say this, with the National Science Foundation.
There you
go. It really is. And I'm trying to think. The Edgar Cayce Institute had to fund a journey of scientists over to explore the Sphinx.
Sure.
Now, why did Edgar Cayce Institute, that doesn't have millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, like the NSF and all these things, why did they have to fund this thing? They didn't have the money. I mean, they have a little bit of money, but not the kind of money to send 8 scientists over to drill holes into the Sphinx. And then have the Egyptian army come out and say, you can't be doing this. Oh, yes, we can. No, you can't leave. And that's what they went through. So, I mean, the people that are doing the research, Nikola Tesla wasn't funded after J.P. Morgan pulled his um, pulled his support for free electricity, free energy.
Right.
Tesla didn't have anybody to support him, and he kept doing it till the early 40s when he passed away. So I mean, you do it because you love what you do and you're curious.
Yeah.
And I'm just hoping that in 100 years we will be looked upon as scientists, because that's the way it always is. When you have an opinion that people don't like
Right.
in the mainstream, it takes sometimes 50, 100 years to get your voice heard.
Right.
But then once you do, it just becomes, oh, yeah, we've known about that for a long time. And then they take ownership of the result that was really yours, or those that were a little bit on the fringe.
Right.
So it's like, and God, don't even talk to me about radionics. They will not study radionics or life, limb, pursuit of the happiness, or anything. They won't study radionics. And I just think radionics is great. So anyway, that's just kind of, and I think it's been good for us to discuss these opinions, don't you?
I do. One of my, I really take shots at science on a regular basis, to the point where I call it scientism now, because they really created their own pseudo religion. Neil deGrasse Tyson, probably the most famous media scientist in the world. There's only 3 of them, by the way, out there that they ever put on camera. Neil Tyson from America, Brian Cox from the UK, and Michio Kaku from Japan. And he made this statement, which just annoyed me to no end. He said, "Science is right whether or not you believe in it." And it's like, okay, and what he was saying was that when we put our stamp on something, it's considered a law. But what bugs me more than anything is when they get it wrong. It's only that science is only right until the day it's not. And they don't issue apologies. They just change the definition. They move the goalposts to where, I know I'm mixing metaphors here, to where it's under the umbrella of science. Little things like neuroscience and free will. An experiment they discovered years ago where the computers can see when a human brain makes a decision 8 seconds before the question's even asked, which screams predestination. Or one of my favorites would be like the double slit experiment, which is akin to the old question we got when we were in school, which was, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, does it actually make a sound? Right? Well, we didn't know back in the 70s. We know now. It's like, no, it doesn't make a sound, because there is no tree, because only the observer can see the tree. There is, the reality is built be around us. And the double slit experiment screams that. It's stuff we do in simulations and computers all day long. And yet science says, well, the double slit experiment we can't explain it, but it's repeatable. Therefore, it's under science. It's like, how does that work? You've basically just said, oh, yeah, it's a mystery. But because we can do it every time, it's now considered science. And yeah, I get the saying, which is science is just mystery, or magic without the mystery. It's like you do it over and over. Things full well. I mean, if you took some of our inventions and took them back just even a couple hundred years, you'd be burned at the stake, right? It'd make the witch trials look like nothing. Right. And yet we use this stuff all the time. We just take it for granted. We grew up with it. I know I'm kind of all over the place with this, but yeah, science bugs me when it does that. They never apologize for when they get it wrong, absolutely freaking wrong. And they just say, well, it's just a new definition of science. That's just how it works. It's like, really? You're going to do that to flat earth too? One day you're going to say, oh, we kind of knew, but we couldn't say it. It's like, really?
We really couldn't say it, because if we published a paper, we would be ridiculed. But we knew there were problems.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what will be said.
Yeah.
Now, they can do whatever they want to do. I don't care.
Look up, if you go into Google, anybody that's listening to this, go into Google and type in ancient cosmologies, and then click on images, right? Every culture going back forever, our entire unbroken history, it only goes back, 5,000 years. And I know there's other cultures that are older than that, but unbroken history. And then look what they drew. They all drew the same thing. They drew a freaking snow globe. And you could say, oh no, the Greeks. It's like, oh, screw the Greeks. The Greeks were making massive assumptions. There was always going to be somebody that was going to go out on a limb, but they didn't know what the world looked like because all the continents weren't discovered. So they were just taking a stab at it. But
What do you mean
everybody,
all the continents? What do you mean all the continents
well,
were
okay, all the
discovered?
continents that are on the map currently. How's that?
Okay, because I am now fishing for the answer of Perry Reese. That map, which has all of the intricacies of Antarctica, and so what I'm saying is, and yet scientists want to say we go back what 11,000 years and that's it, when they have artifacts that are much older than that.
Yeah,
and and then I love the phrase impossible engineering. I have taught this phrase to a number of people. Here's an example of impossible engineering. Let's build the Erie Canal. Okay?
Okay.
Build the Erie Canal. 363 miles from Albany to Buffalo.
Sure.
Okay, I asked my friend Josiah, who lives in Buffalo, and his dad was in construction. I said, Josiah, suppose I had a 10-year project and it would take me 10 years to do it down here in the Carolinas.
Mm-hmm.
Could I do it in 10 years up there in Buffalo? He said, oh my goodness, no, because you can't work but half a year, sometimes less,
right?
Because the ground is frozen. There's snow. If you want to do construction, you're not going to be able to do that, John. I didn't tell him why I was asking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they couldn't have built the Erie Canal in 19 years. They couldn't have done it.
Right.
Because they didn't have enough time. They had like 9.5 years.
Right.
So, I mean, you know, it just doesn't work. It's called impossible engineering. Another evidence of impossible engineering is, of course, the Pyramid of Giza. We could not build that today if we had to.
No, we couldn't. And in fact, to your point, when I heard that, that was one of my little bucket list things. And I went, good Lord, 12 years ago at least, where, you know, I stood right there, the Pyramid of Giza, because people said, you really want to get a perspective, go there and look at it, and then turn around and look at the city. And I understood what they meant. And I'm not trying to pick on the Egyptian people, but when I got there and I looked at the pyramids, which are incredibly impressive, and you got to remember the marble siding has all been stripped off of them. You know, the capstones, which still nobody knows where they went, right? The wonderful capstones, and the white marble siding, which was on until I think the early 1800s, and then they stripped it off for parts because the marble was expensive. That was there. But when you look at Cairo, you realize, because Cairo is just it's a mess. Right. There are so many streets on there that aren't even paved that they don't even let tourists go down. And you look and it's like, oh yeah, these guys had nothing to do. I mean, Cairo backs up. You look at the pictures and it looks like the pyramids are in the middle of the desert. That is not true. There's a Starbucks 100 yards away from the pyramids. If you turn around, they made it to where you don't build in front of the scenic part of the pyramids, so it can be the ultimate tourist thing. But right behind it is, you know, just a nonstop thing of tour buses. And I knew, and they say, oh yeah, the pyramids were built in 30 years. It's like, really? You know, to your point, we couldn't build them now. You built these things in 30 years? Because there isn't a single hieroglyph about how they were built. Not a single one. And I understood, which is, it's something that mankind has been notorious for, which is taking credit for things that aren't there. Imagine you're one of the Pharaoh's recon people, right? Back in the day, before Cairo was built, and you're going through the desert and you find the pyramids. And then you realize, there's nobody around here. You just hear wind, right? It's just sand and nothing. It's like, you know what? We built them. And all you have to do is, and within one generation, that's it. The pharaohs built the pyramids, and then they are elevated to demigod status. And the whole city and civilization and the myths and legends are built around that claim. That's like, oh yeah, the pharaohs built the pyramids. They were buried inside them. And even though it's like, yeah, well, how'd you build them? It doesn't really matter. Again, Hollywood plot point. We're just moving past that. Doesn't matter how we built them. We just built them, to where it was a mystery for the ages. And every scholar for years and centuries said the same thing. It's like, how'd you build it? And they came up with all these theories about, you know, the rolling logs and thousands of men. And it's like, really? Because you'd have to put those massive blocks in there, one every 2 minutes? Something, it was like ridiculous the amount of stone that was used for each of them, for all three. It was just freaking amazing. So yes, to your point, impossible engineering, absolutely.
I love that phrase. And we see it. It's funny. We see it every day, but we ignore it. We are conditioned to ignore things that we don't understand. And you know that.
Yeah. Yeah. We accept it. It's like, yeah, okay, fine. It exists. It's there. So somebody had to have built it. It's too tough for me to think about. Therefore, I'm just going to go on with my daily life. And where's my Krispy Kreme donut? They gloss over it, and they don't explore it. The scientists, though, they keep scratching their heads, and they keep publishing papers. Oh, well, we think it's this, we think it's that. It's like, no, that doesn't work. That doesn't work either. You keep trying.
That's what the skeptics do with weather balloons. They
Right.
want to say everything's a weather balloon, and that's fine.
Oh yeah,
Let them say it.
that's absolutely not true. Let me get through this in there really quick. Because I was a UFO guy for years when I was out in Colorado. I lived in there for 20 years in the beautiful high altitude sky, and there was this British program, little conspiracy thing. And at the very end, he goes, "You want to see some weird stuff?" He goes, "Get some night vision, go outside, start looking at the sky for a while." And that's exactly what I did. I hunted for different versions of night vision binoculars, not monoculars, binoculars like 5 power or higher, Gen 1s, because you don't need Gen 2 or Gen 3. Don't spend the money. And I laid up there, and I'm on my back in the snow, right, in Colorado, watching the sky. And it's like, oh wow, there's a lot more satellites than I thought, right? Or weather balloons or whatever. And I was getting pretty bored. It's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, the sky is crawling with satellites, apparently, way, 10, 15 times more than I thought, which you can't see with the naked eye. And then all of a sudden I was watching one, because they're about the same size as stars, right? I think deliberately. I think it's a Steven Spielberg joke, inside joke we'll talk about later, which is all of a sudden I saw one come across me, and it slows down and it stops, right? I'm going, what are you doing, right? And then it was like it was lost. And then all of a sudden it makes a hard left turn, and at ballistic speed goes up even higher, and goes out of sight. I'm going, what the heck did I just see? And then I didn't trust anything. So I started watching them more and more. I'm going, these aren't satellites. These aren't weather balloons. I don't know who they are, but they ain't us. And again, it was so easy to tell because DIA, Denver International Airport, was 40 miles directly to the east of me. So I knew the inbound routes. I know the outbound routes. These things were at least twice as high as any civilian aircraft. And I stayed on the ground and watched these things for years at night. It was absolutely amazing. I was hooked, absolutely hooked with the night vision stuff. And the only reason I stopped is because I moved back to the Northwest, where, too much cloud cover. But it was absolutely amazing. Highly encourage anybody. Get some night vision binoculars. You can find the cheap ones on Amazon now, the next gen stuff. And they're all real. Absolutely real.
Right. We have a fellow named Les Durant. He's been on my show several times.
Yeah.
And he shows people how to view those objects that seem to be flying around all over.
Yeah.
And he's going to be at both the World UFO Conference on November 2nd, and he's also going to be at the Atlanta UFO Conference on February 1st. So, we got that part covered, because I believe, like you do, there's lots of stuff up there, and they don't bother to tell us, so we don't bother to do it. Then you find someone that does, and he trains a lot of people on how to look at these things. So it's very interesting.
And the Americans like to take credit for it. Again, the American military, I will give them credit, which is they, with a wink and a smile, they kind of say, kind of hint. It's like, wow, it could be us reverse engineering stuff. It's like, yeah, but that doesn't explain pretty much, that's the recent stuff. Full well. I mean, you're well versed in this. It's like for me, the greatest UFO sighting wasn't Roswell. It wasn't even 1891 or an 1899 Aurora, Texas. It was 1561 Nuremberg. The great Nuremberg event over Germany. Giant space aircraft carriers hammering each other in a cloudless April sky for an hour. To where, and again, there were no photographs, obviously, because it was pre-photography. But the sketch artists drew the whole thing in glorious color. And it's still in their museums, and it's gorgeous. Look at the wiki page on it; it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
And
Well,
yeah, so that's
and
for the U.S. military. It's like U.S. military. Yeah, yeah. That was hundreds of years before we were a country. So don't try to think you're going to take credit for that one.
I'm sorry. I thought you might state my favorite sighting of all time, and you'll be surprised.
What is it?
Pascagoula.
Ooh,
Terrifying. Those two guys, they both said independently they have never been so frightened in their lives.
sure.
Pascagoula. And I mean, nobody does anything about it. It's not celebrated. If I
Right.
didn't live so far from Mississippi, I would go run a conference over there because it's a landmark in ufology.
Yeah.
Kind of like Betty and Barney Hill. Why doesn't New Hampshire have a Betty and Barney Hill festival?
There
Oh
you
my
go.
God, that's a good idea. Hey, Mark, you want to come help me do a Betty and Barney Hill festival?
That'd be kind of fun.
And I know here we're not supposed to talk about things like this, but it would be fun because they have a granddaughter that's still alive.
There you go.
And I mean, it would just be so much fun because I know it wasn't any fun for them,
No, of course not.
but I mean, for us, it would. I mean, it's like the joy you get going to the Mothman Festival.
There you go. Yeah.
And what's great about the Mothman Festival is not what it celebrates. It's the fact that Point Pleasant, West Virginia was flat out broke and was really about to close.
Yeah.
The city offices were getting ready to close. And there's a gentleman, I don't remember his name, but he was a vocational education teacher at the local high school.
Mm-hmm.
And in 3 weeks, he decided to put together tours of the dynamite plant. Had 3,000 people come. And then year before last, it was named the largest economic driver between Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Charleston, West Virginia. And it saved, economically speaking, that entire part of West Virginia.
Nice.
That's what the Mothman has done for us.
People
So,
love a mystery, as you know, and some mysteries are better than others. I don't want to necessarily pick on ghost hunters too much, but God, how many years did that show run? And the joke was, every episode it's like, wait, shh, did you hear something? I mean, that's basically the show. It's like, really? 10 seasons? You get away with that for 10 freaking seasons? And human beings love a mystery. We're drawn to them. UFOs and everything around that is so compelling. And on a even a higher level, because it gets you closer to the core questions that we ask every day. It's like, why are we here and are we alone? Has anyone else gone through this? Everybody wants to look at the upperclassmen, because I kind of treat it like a high school, and because we're not the first people to rent this apartment by any stretch in this world. I mean, full well the civilizations that have been lost. The sunken cities off Japan, the sunken cities off of India, Puma Punku, Machu Picchu.
how about the sunken city 50 miles off New Orleans?
Ooh, I don't know about that one.
I'm working on it.
Ooh, neat. That sounds like fun.
Oh, it is. And I'm having a hard time reaching everybody, but I don't care. You know what? I hate to admit this to everybody, but I am really an idiot. If I want to do something, I will lower my head and I will keep pushing forward until I find the answer. Now, I just will. And I don't know that it's necessarily any kind of smarts. It's just being pigheaded. And I think sometimes that's what good research is.
Yeah, I mean, some people call it stubborn. I call it persistence, and persistence. I mean, is why I call it persistence pays off. If you're going to get to your answer one way or the other as long as you keep pushing. So don't ever come down on yourself for that.
Oh no, I'm just saying, kind of comically speaking, I just put my head down and I just keep going. When I believe something is out there, I have another area of the Southeast that I happen to know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to tell where it is because we're about 2 years away from a major conference up there.
Right.
But I know where something is, and I'm just not going to stop. because it's fun. I guess that's the deal. I have this little business, makes me a living, it pays my expenses, but I love what I do. And you know what I woke up today? I
Mm.
woke up today with your two questions on my head and saying, "Oh my gosh, I get to talk to Mark Sargent today." So I had the best morning of anybody in America because I
Aw,
got to talk. No, because I got to talk to you about the things that I love.
yeah.
And how lucky honestly, how lucky can I get? And I hope everybody, I don't care what you find that you really love and think is great, find it
Yeah.
and explore it because that's what life's about,
Yeah.
isn't it, sir?
It is the saying probably better than most, which was it's cheesy, but I love it, which is find a job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And it's so true, which is I try to tell people is like, look, happiness is not something that should be chased. It should be something that is discovered. And once you find it, hold on to it. Don't let anyone the peer pressure is such a tough social motivator because it keeps people back, drags people back into the flock. And and they end up doing stuff they don't want to do. They just keep doing the grind and not, and then all of a sudden they get regret at the end. It's like, oh man, I mean, how many times you heard this from people? It's like, oh, I should have been doing this so much sooner. Should have been doing this so much earlier. And it's like, why didn't you? It's like, well, I was afraid of what friends and family and coworkers would think. And it's like, yeah, throw it out. Peer pressure only goes so far. I mean, I know the Ash experiment is real, and I know the Milgram experiment is real, but you have a chance to break out of that. And if it makes you happy, do it. As long as it's constructive and it's not hurting anybody, then hey, it's not hurting anybody.
Now, by the way, you just mentioned two things, those two experiments, and I know
Yeah.
that 99% of our listeners do not know what you're talking about. Please
Oh yeah.
carefully state those names so that people can do like I do. They're going to go to Wikipedia or
Right.
somewhere and look it up because, it's important when you find these little nuggets of information that you explore them. Please tell
Okay,
us, Mark.
sorry. The Milgram experiment is the famous electroshock experiment, which researchers figured out that people. The short version is that people will defer to anyone in a position of authority or a lab coat and chance to do awful things. So what they did was you went into a room and they introduce you to somebody. It's like, oh, this person's going to go into another room, which you're not going to see, and you're going to ask them questions. And if they get these questions wrong, you're going to hit this button and it's going to shock them. And you're going to be able to hear them this entire time, right? And every time they get it wrong, you're going to up the voltage a little bit, right? And what they found was as long as they didn't see the person directly, right? And of course, the screams and everything from the other room were pre-recorded. It wasn't real. You weren't shocking anyone, right? But you didn't know that. But eventually what happened is these people would get kind of uncomfortable. It's like, I don't think I'm doing this guy any favors. And he would look to the guy with the lab coat and the clipboard. And the lab coat and the clipboard is like, you must continue the experiment. You're required to continue. There's no law. Doesn't have him with a gun to his head, right? And what they found was initially the scientists thought, well, less than 2% of the people are going to shock these guys to death, right? And it turns out that as long as you think you're off the hook, right? And that's like the scientist is going to take the responsibility. There was a 60% chance that you were going to shock this guy into the grave. Then you combine that with the Ash experiment, which is the Ash experiment is just straight up peer pressure. And you know this one, which is you go into a room with like 5 people, right? All these 5 people are actors. You're the only one that's not. And then the guy up on the board, it's like, tell me, all you guys raise your hand. What is the shortest line on the board, right? And the first couple are easy, and then you get to the third one. It's absolutely wrong. You know that is not the shortest line on the board, right? And the 5 people are like, no, raising their hands because you want to fit in, because you don't want to stand out from the peer group. You go along with it, right? And then same thing, Candid Camera used to do it back in the day with elevators. Very, very funny.
Oh, Candid Camera was just,
They
they
were
had to take they had to take that off television. It was too cool.
it was so fun where you be in an elevator and the people you get on the elevator and 5 other people usually would be standing facing the wrong way. like to the side, where it wasn't even a door, right? They're facing that way, and almost invariably, if the elevator ride was long enough, that person coming in would turn that way because they wanted to fit in with the group. The point was, when you merge those two experiments, right, the Milgram experiment and the Ash experiment, to where you were sitting there controlling some voltage, with a guy, and there was two other people down from you doing the same thing, that 60% chance of you just keeping upping the voltage until you maxed it out went up to 90%. So don't tell me what people aren't capable of. People with the power of persuasion and the power of just fitting. That's why they call it mob rules, by the way, which is why mobs are really dangerous. Once that groundswell starts going, right, mobs, are capable of doing all, burn that building. Oh yeah, let's do that. Because they feel, not only do they want to go along with the group, but they feel like they're part of something. So anyway, yeah. So it's a powerful motivator, but at the same time, you have a chance. You have the choice to break out of it. It's just a question of, are you open-minded enough to do it, and does, kind of like with you, do you feel a passion for it? Does it make you happy to do something that the rest of the people aren't a part of? If it does, then ignore them. Yes, you're going to catch some hell for it, but you will be more satisfied in the end. If you stick with it, in the end, and be like, yeah, I stood my ground. That should be one of my t-shirts, by the way. Stand your ground.
That's true. Well, Mark, this has truly been a pleasure speaking with you. I've enjoyed it so much.
Thanks.
And I believe that our listeners will too. You're right. Just do what you like.
Yeah.
If you're lucky like me, you can get lucky.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I wake up every morning and I'm very happy with what I do. And I go to bed at 2 a.m. I mean, just because I do. I mean, because I'm working that late. I've got a project I'm working on, trying to finish up Georgia UFO sightings, the book. I've got to finish it up, get it to my editor this weekend, get the thing out on Amazon and tell everybody about it so I can share the excitement, because nobody's ever done this. But I can't believe that nobody took the top 30 UFO sightings in Georgia and wrote a book about them. I mean, that's just nuts. But I did.
Well, I'll have to check it out.
Well, yeah, we'll talk. I'll give you a call when all that's over, like next week, and we'll do it. But Mark, thank you very much. It's always been a pleasure. Will you come back?
Absolutely, I'll come back. Just let me know.
Okay, well, I will. And look, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. This is Dr. John Stamey. I want to tell you two things. Number one, November the 2nd is the date for the fall 2024 World UFO Conference, Piedmont University, Demorest, Georgia. Beautiful location, the nicest people. They are wonderful to work with. They're kind of like my buddies up at the Rabun County Chamber of Commerce. They are wonderful to work with too. I meet some of the, because of this paranormal world, I meet some of the absolute nicest people in the world, like Linda Scarborough and Mickey Duval up in Rabun County, and the folks down there at Piedmont Tech, and the people at the Gainesville Civic Center. Everybody's really nice. And it's funny, you want to talk about paranormal events, and most of the time they listen, and I really appreciate it. And of course, we had one of our favorite guests, Mark Sargent. We'll have him back again. So folks, thank you so much for being with us. We will see you really soon. We're trying to up our number of podcasts every week on ScaryCast, because there are a lot of great guests out there. We just had Dave Shealy on a little bit ago. We're going to have him for a part 2. Then we're going to combine the two. Dave Shealy being, of course, the head of the Skunk Ape Museum in Florida. Dave is a fantastic person. Mark is a fantastic person. And I've found that these folks are really experts in many fields and entertain us with good facts. So Mark, thanks for entertaining us with good facts. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Have a good one. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.